Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another IDA Friday webinar. We made it to the end of another week, but I know there really are no ends to the week. It seems like we're just rolling from one day to the next. So let's take some time, enjoy the next hour, take a break from all the hustle and bustle that's going on, most likely at our homes, and enjoy this webinar. Today, we're focusing on redefining retail. Everyone is seeing the news, cities are reopening, businesses are trying to get up and running, the rules are beginning to change, and this could be a more timely opportunity to talk about what does redefined retail look like in this post-COVID or current COVID environment. Really excited to have two fantastic leaders sharing their expertise with us this morning. And unlike prior conversations which were explicitly open dialogues between all of the panelists, we've asked both Jennifer and Bobby to do more of a full-on expert presentation of their material before we open it up to our audience. We do want to engage the audience. We do want your questions. And so again, I would ask that you look to your GoToWebinar questions pane, look for the queue and add your questions into the system. Both myself and Matthew Stebbin from our office will be reviewing those. I may grab one or two and pop it into the middle of their presentation, but they've organized it so well that they'll present information and loop back on that information towards the end. So we look forward to hearing their presentation and then a formal Q&A for the last part of our presentation. So with that, let's not waste any more time and jump right in. First, I want to introduce our two fantastic presenters. We have Bobby Boone. Bobby is the founder and chief strategist of AICP. He has nearly a decade of experience in retail real estate, working to empower tenants, developers, and cities to create community-serving retail. It was interesting, prior to founding AICP, Bobby led a citywide effort to attract and maintain small business in Detroit and tackled wide-ranging retail challenges as a senior strategist at StreetSense. He is a certified AICP planner and also certified in lead neighborhood development. Bobby, great to have you this morning. Let's double check that we still have a clear audio with you.
I could hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Good morning, sir. Glad to have you.
Good morning.
And kicking off our presentation and running all the systems behind the scenes will be Jennifer Gregory. And Jennifer is the president of Downtown Strategies at Retail Strategies, where she focuses on revitalization of downtowns for client communities. Through her downtown vision and strategy workshop process, Jen advises communities on market analysis, tourism, economic vitality, and design updates for downtown areas. She joined Retail Strategies with a 10-year career in community development and downtown revitalization. It was really kind of interesting. Jen is one of those rock stars who was named top 50 under 40 professionals by the Mississippi Business Journal in 2016. So we're really lucky to have her with us today. Good morning, Jennifer. How are you?
Good morning, David. Doing well. Thanks so much for having us.
Oh, fantastic, and it's our pleasure. Matthew, let's turn this over to Jennifer so we can jump right into the presentation. Again, audience members, please feel free to send any questions during the presentations and we'll get this ball rolling. Take it away, Jennifer.
Okay. Sounds terrific. Well, thank you guys for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today and with Bobby. Really have a lot of admiration for the International Downtown Association and for all of you who are on the front lines, really doing this great work that all of us are charged to do every day. So we'll jump right in. And as David introduced it so well, today we're really talking about retail. And there are a lot of different perspectives. As we hear about retail, we hear about certain companies are doing well in the midst of COVID-19 and are hanging on. Others are suffering. And we know that many of you in your districts, your small businesses are probably struggling considerably. So we want to talk about today a couple of different topics within retail. Data and analytics being the first. How can you really understand what's going on in your district? Maximizing retail and restaurant real estate. So we are going to talk about real estate and how to really look at backfilling any existing vacancies or vacancies that might be coming, the importance of retail inventory, both within the built environment and within the stores as well. How to support at-risk businesses, and then, as we are all anxiously watching, really the steps to opening back up our stores. So today we're going to start off by looking at retail industry trends. And as we go through the presentation, you'll see the Retail Strategies logo on the top of some of the slides in the top right corner, and then you'll see the And Access logo at the top of other slides. And so Bobby and I are going to go back and forth today, really have a dialogue discussion, but also I am really coming from a perspective of national retail. So we do think it's important that we look at what's happening nationally with industry trends, looking at what these big companies are doing, because many times small businesses can model those same wins, if there are any, or strategies to really help move through this process. So that's going to be the perspective that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And then Bobby is going to be focusing more on a district level. So we hope that'll be helpful as we go through. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is trends and what we're really seeing. And, you know, in a post-pandemic landscape, it's going to mean a lot of different things, both for consumers and for brands. These three top changes are ones that we're going to focus on today, and you're probably certainly seeing them every day as you move through your work days and even with your families. And the first is that you know, consumers will have adopted short-term behaviors through quarantine and isolation during the pandemic that we think will become permanent. So we'll briefly look at those. Additionally, the economic reality is very different than it was 2-3 months ago. And so because of that, consumer behaviors will change as well. And then lastly, the retail landscape is going to look very different. And so that, both on a national level and within your districts, is something to be aware of. So that first tip, or that first trend that we mentioned, consumers, the changes in short-term behaviors. As you can see in these bullet points, I think probably all of us can identify with these, but they'll certainly transition into the consumer world. And that is that we are doing many, many more things online. We're shopping online. Even if we're trying to support our local businesses, we're purchasing those goods online, picking them up curbside or to go. Germophobia is another one. And actually just this morning read some reports that really project that a big long-term effect of this is going to be psychological, of course. We're worried about staying safe and staying healthy. And so certainly we're all very concerned with cleanliness and health, sanitation. In-homing is another. We've been in our homes. We've been working from home. My goodness, my home has been bursting with my children and my work and my husband's work. And so we're getting used to that. We're exercising in home. And so how is that going to change behaviors? Brand loyalty is another one. And looking at a national level, Target is a store that has really seen an uptick in brand loyalty as they have implemented and really promoted their curbside pickup service. We'll talk about this later, but companies, even small businesses that implement these strategies well, where consumers feel safe, they will see an uptick in brand loyalty certainty. And then lastly, the hoarding hangover. You know, goodness, we've all been stockpiling our pantries and our cupboards, trying to prepare for an unknown period of time. There will be an effect with that later as well. The second is that there will be economic changes. There already are economic changes, and that's going to change consumer habits as well. A potential recession. Certainly we're in a very tough economic time now, but we don't know really what the long-term effects of that are going to be on the economy. Many are projecting that there will be a recession. And so because of that, and because of all of the unemployment and just the struggles and challenges that we as Americans and North Americans are facing, there is going to be economic scarring. And so people are going to start holding on to their money even more. They're going to hold back from those luxury purchases. And lastly, discount retailers and value-oriented brands stand to win. And we're going to repeat that again on the next slide, but it's important to note, after the economic recession in 2008, really for a 10 to 12-year period, we saw these discount retailers really taking off. So on a national level, Dollar General, Dollar Tree, stores like that, but even on a local level, thrift stores and repurposing, we saw that type of purchasing really take off. People are concerned about their money, and we're definitely going to see that continue. And lastly, the retail landscape is going to look very differently. As I think all of us know, the pandemic is not affecting all brands and retailers equally. Restaurants are taking an especially hard hit right now. Those retailers of non-essential products are really struggling, apparel stores in particular. However, because of those consumer behavior shifts that we talked about previously, in homing, we are seeing certain elements of apparel increase, fitness apparel, loungewear. We're not wearing our suits as often. We're exercising from home. And so we are seeing people make more of those purchases. So it's important for retailers, even those on the local level, to follow these national trends and really emulate what some of these national brands are doing, especially the apparel industry. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bobby.
And thanks for the first introduction, Jennifer. Just for our audiences, as some questions are coming in, yes, all of the slides and a copy and a recording of this presentation will be available on IDA's website following this presentation. So rest assured, all this information will be available.
Great to hear, David. So as Jen mentioned previously, I'm going to be covering many of the issues impacting your district as they regard to small businesses. That is going to be indicated by my logo that's at the top right corner for those who joined a little bit late. So as Jen was alluding to, apparel's being hit largely, but think about additional businesses that are surrounding that industry as well. So laundromats or dry cleaners, for instance, and how they are impacted by this. And many of these businesses are small and they line our corridors, and they also have a lot of the issues dealing with whether they're essential or not, as well as how they can access various things throughout this pandemic in order to sustain operations. So, we all are aware of the access to capital issues. That's always been an issue for small businesses as they try to receive financing. However, during this time, when you see that, some of the larger federal programs are going towards much larger companies than the micro businesses that may line our corridors, that's of concern. They also have limited cash reserves, meaning they can't quickly allocate funding to supplies or other services in order to sustain once they are able to reopen. It's probably already depleted given their existing conditions. We have a lack of information and technology. This probably is worse for businesses that are in minority districts or minority-owned businesses. They receive information later. They may not necessarily have the technology or the language skills in order to submit a sound or successful application. And then looking at what is that time and expertise that's required in order to do so, understanding everything from your accounting softwares and your last year's profit and loss statements, et cetera, that are needed in order to qualify for some of these programs. So all of these combined really equates to unfortunate threat of vacancy and blight. So we like to ensure that some of the strategies that we're mentioning later is just really to start to avoid this potential outcome. Next slide, please. But what does that look like? So economically, the Harvard Business Review was reviewing pandemics on a macroeconomic level and how they impacted the global economy and the national economy as well. Most pandemics fall within the V scenario, which basically means after the pandemic crisis is over, there's a big spike within sales, so the GDP growth, and then it resumes back to normal. There's another scenario, the U scenario, that doesn't see the spike, but then continues to resume at, say a 2% year-over-year growth. However, unlikely opportunity is a continued recession that occurs after the pandemic. So that is 1% growth in comparison to the 2% that predated, say, COVID. But what does all this mean? If there is actually a second wave of infection. So we're looking at potential steps to say, hey, how do we deal with 2 V scenarios that turns into a W, or maybe a rounded W instead, and we like to prepare each of our businesses for that.
So next, we're going to dig into data and analytics and how they can be used to really help us understand what's happening and how to move forward. Something that's really important to me is that we all remember that the basics still really matter. We're so caught up in trying to determine what our next steps are going to be post COVID-19. I mean, certainly that's our jobs, but it is really important to realize that probably before COVID, we did have some vacancies within our downtowns. Likely we're going to have more. But those basics that help us backfill those vacancies or help us recruit new businesses to our downtowns are still very, very important, because retailers, as they're looking to open up a new business or expand, and remember, not every retail industry or retail category has been poorly affected by this. Some have seen this as an opportunity. And so there are going to be new businesses that open up. And so as such, it's really important to keep in mind the basics and to really know your district from a data perspective. And so understanding your true trade area before COVID-19. So this image on the top is visualizing mobile data collection to understand really where consumers are coming from that visit a given area. So tools like that are available in the marketplace to understand the movement within your district and where your consumers coming from and what are they purchasing in your district and out through just a traditional gap analysis. That'll help you understand what your ideal mix of use is, what there is demand for within your area and from your trade area, to help you guide your local businesses, your existing businesses, and to recruit new ones. So getting back to basics, remembering that these businesses that are expanding are still looking at these types of data and analytics to make their decisions. And also, it's important, I think, that we kind of remind ourselves where we are in this pandemic timeline. These are just kind of 6 key consumer behavior thresholds that we've seen throughout the pandemic. And when we look at these, this is where we are right now. So we started out, and it's different in every state. It's different, depending geographically where you are. But we all started out kind of purchasing protective equipment, being a little bit more mindful, stocking up on Lysol, Germex. And so the consumer purchasing patterns followed that. Next, we were reacting more to the information that we had and the spread of this virus. We were stocking our pantries, so the consumer patterns reflected that. We saw huge upticks in grocery shopping, but fewer trips to the store. So large grocery carts, but fewer trips. So understanding really all of these consumer behaviors will help us analyze the data that we have. And so this is the most recent data that we have. These are retail sales month over month for March of this year. So basically this is not comparing to March of 2019. This is simply comparing it to the month before. We saw an almost 9% decline in retail sales. So as we talked about earlier, kind of the economic scarring, people are holding onto their money, and some don't have the money to spend, certainly, that were laid off or that are experiencing unemployment, unfortunately. When we look at it categorically, we see that it follows those consumer thresholds that we just looked at, that there has been an uptick in health and personal care, grocery, and non-store retailers, which are really defined as those that don't exclusively have a brick and mortar store. So people were purchasing more things online. We saw that clothing saw a tremendous decline. And, as I relate to that, I have two small children, and they're growing and the seasons are changing, but I haven't really purchased the things that I normally would for the summertime. I'm in Mississippi in the deep South, so it's warm here. But I haven't purchased those things yet because I just don't know what we're going to need. Are they going to be at summer camp? Are they going to be at home? So just that consumer uncertainty. So it's important to follow those thresholds. David, did you want to interject?
I just want to add a question with regard to data. It's coming from Alex Balloon, and he's curious to maybe get your thoughts on the challenge with outdated psychometric market segmentation as consumer behaviors have shifted so dramatically during this time period. But maybe a broad way to also think about it is, data in real time and changing so quickly. Any thoughts on, how to utilize data in this COVID-19 era?
That's a terrific question. And it's very important to monitor as it happens. But as you mentioned, certainly a lot of the data is already outdated. The psychographics and things like that, people's behaviors have changed. So, our best recommendation is to watch this type of information that we're looking at right now. Look at the categorical changes in retail month to month. And that's really the best we can do, with the exception of talking to your local retailers, which Bobby's going to get to in just a second. But from a national perspective, unfortunately, week to week data is not readily available. And so looking at the past month is really as good as we can get. But I think what's also important to remember is that slide that we just looked at, the consumer threshold. So the last one, we're kind of in this phase right now where we've been at home, we're operating at home, but the markets are going to open back up. Stores and districts, however comfortable with that or not we feel, they are going to open back up. People, in my state, fortunately or unfortunately, are already eating in restaurants. They're getting back to normal. It's a little scary. I'm still staying home. But all that to say, I think we need to follow the monthly trends, but compare those and make sure we're pairing those with the appropriate consumer behavior threshold, because I don't think we can look at this and say apparel is dead. We have seen some national stores like J. Crew and those file for bankruptcy. It's also really important to follow the historical story about stores like that. They've been carrying a significant amount of debt from the recession. This was really the final nail in the coffin. A lot of companies are already starting to think about how they shift and interact with their consumers differently. So it's a great question. I think just keep following it as best we can, but don't get into the doom and gloom because it's going to keep changing.
Great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. So, looking at a district level, as Jen alluded to, constant communication with property owners and business owners, that really will allow you to understand, all right, what is consumer behavior on the ground specifically for your district? That will change over time. Some days there'll be queues of activity along the street, and then others that might be a ghost town. So, as you continue to evolve and monitor this, that's both pedestrian and vehicular counts. You have to also see what's going on in a larger basis. So looking at Google mobility reports actually tracks data on a day-by-day basis for each county throughout the nation, and if you're in DC, in the district. So this is a sample report from Fulton County. There are 3 categories that are pictured here, but there are a total of 6 per county, and it's broken into different categories. And so you can say, hey, how has how's traffic and mobility occurring, within the county that is impacting potential retail sales. So, as that mobility increases, you hope to see a substantial uptick in actual sales across the businesses within your district. There's also Google Trends, which allows you to do business-to-business comparison. So you can look at them and say, hey, how many times are people searching each of these businesses within my neighborhood? And then that will allow you to start to get a understanding of, oh, who's doing well with marketing? How can I offer additional assistance to those maybe that's not experiencing that same trend rates or those upticks day over day or hour over hour in the case of Google Trends. Slide.
Bobby, I think we've frozen. Jennifer may frozen. Are you able to
Yes,
address it for us?
I can take that. So, as we think about long term, how do you actually monitor the COVID impacts? So that's really understanding, what categories are impacted by sales, as previously mentioned. So understanding supermarket has definitely increased, where entertainment, tourism, jewelry, all the other categories experienced the greatest decrease. As online sales continue to go up. Oh man, that was a slide to look at. Here you go. Can you pull?
While I'm pulling that up, I will share with you that there was also a lot of questions. Let's just put a pause on the presentation for a moment, Bobby. When you were talking about Google the Google products, there were a number of questions that came in related to that, including how do I get access to the Google products? Is mobility data actionable? Came from Curvin. Another question from Kristen was talking about more localized numbers for neighborhoods versus citywide. So maybe just a short discussion on on that tool that you mentioned, because it has quite a few.
So yeah, you can. So Google released this probably, I think, at the beginning or the middle of March, and so what the Google Mobility reports were a opportunity for public health officials specifically to understand, how people are moving. And then, as I continued to think about, all right, what does this mean for retail and what data is actually on the ground day in and day out? This is one way of keeping a pulse on that. Unfortunately, they do not disaggregate that data into zip codes or smaller geographies. That is probably just because of either staff capacity or, however they're leveraging their data sources. However, I think there's an opportunity to just pair that specifically with data associated with those. If you have pedestrian counters on the ground, are those data points correlated? If they aren't, all right, what's the percent difference between each? In order to say, oh, my district is actually having greater activity than what's being seen on a countywide level. And then, looking at those specific categories that were mentioned on the previous slide, some of them are specifically around retail. And so the data looks at, as people enter into retail establishments. So utilizing that mobile phone data. So, once people do a Google search and then they keep their location identification on, and then once they get there. I think that addressed most of your questions.
It is. I think I would summarize that, not every individual data set is completely actionable, but it adds to the compilation of a variety of data sources that we're all sorting through and trying to come up with, good decision making. We were just drilling down a little deeper on the Google product set that's being offered. Jennifer, as a number of attendees had questions in that regards, but we have you back. We're so glad you're back. Let's make sure we can hear you as well.
Sorry, friends. Glad to be back with you. I'm at the mercy of the weather here. Thank you to my friends for picking up where we left off, and I'm sure they did a terrific job. But on this slide, really just wanted to highlight that, again, going back to those consumer behaviors, we're seeing the uptick in traffic online to the things that make sense with what we've all been doing as we've been stuck in home. And so, the last point, though, that I'd like to make too is that it's very expensive. We've seen Amazon see a huge increase, I think 27% increase in sales, although they had a 29% increase in expenses. It's very expensive for them to provide the goods and services safely because they're on such a large scale. So there are unique opportunities for local businesses to take these same methods of providing goods safely to customers, curbside, delivery, pickup, whatever it may be, at a lower cost. So again, modeling after what the national businesses are doing successfully, but there are opportunities for those costs to be lower and for, again, to really increase that brand loyalty. And I think Matthew's controlling the slides, so thank you so much. So now we're going to really talk about the real estate component, and I think that's something that's probably been on a lot of your minds, and that is, if I have vacancies or if I'm going to have them, what do I do, and what are you seeing elsewhere? So I wanted to give you guys kind of what we're seeing from the real estate perspective that might help you with your decisions. And the first is that these retail tenant reps who represent national brands. So again, we're giving you a national perspective that you can model in your local district. These retail tenant reps have been aggressively looking for real estate. Sometimes there's a market that they want to be in, but they're very particular about the real estate. It has to be on a certain square footage, a certain amount of frontage, a certain location, what have you. And so there are markets that these retailers have identified that they want to be in, but that A+ site that they've had their eye on hasn't been available. Because of the shifts in the economy and the change of the retail landscape, that piece of property might become available. So the ones that have really been aggressive are the ones that we think are going to really win in the end. I think that goes back to the importance of you guys, and we're going to talk about a building inventory in just a bit, but knowing your real estate in your district is critical. Knowing who owns the properties, what the square footage is, so that when a prospective business or developer comes along, that you can help them fill that. Secondly, we're not seeing property owners reduce the price of their land right now, which is, I think, helpful. It's something that we expected to perhaps see, that there would be, just like there was after the 2008 recession, just a drastic fall of prices. People are trying to liquidate what they have. We haven't really seen that thus far. So we do think that while there's been a decline in retail sales, that there is going to be that comeback. And lastly, with shopping center owners, and I think this can translate into your districts with maybe mixed use developments or more of those large scale operations, that they're moving forward with leases, that businesses are still signing leases. Many have been put on a 60-day hold just to kind of see what happens. Just like all of us feel like we're in a holding pattern. And a lot of tenants are asking for rent relief from their landlords, which makes a lot of sense. You all are probably seeing that in your districts, and by and large, those landlords are honoring those requests, but we're still seeing the ball move forward as it relates to retail and new deals. So I think that's really important for you guys to know and really to have some hope there.
So I totally agree. Some of the things, just picking up that conversation a little bit, is looking at, how property owners are impacted by offering that rent relief, specifically as in districts that may not be able to obtain a national brand that specifically leverages their local businesses. So the property owner ends up incurring a lot of that additional debt, especially if they have mortgage payments that are soon to be due one day. And then so thinking about connecting with your local economic development organizations to see if they are interested in establishing some sort of revolving loan fund to help restructure debt might be essential for that conversation. But moving forward specifically to how you can help maximize some of the real estate on the ground. So thinking about queuing is really guiding that for the businesses, specifically businesses that receive varying levels of public health information in regards to how to do that within their, say, 4 to 6 feet of sidewalk that's right in front of their store. So having a district-wide strategy with clear communications on the grounds is one step. A company out of Cincinnati, Ohio, Yard and Company, has been doing some guerrilla urbanism projects where they've been spray painting signs about social distancing within commercial districts, so that once a big rainfall comes, of course that will be removed, but in the interim it allows continued communications. Also thinking about creative use of public space, so that is alleys, parking lots, even the streets. How can you expand sidewalk cafes or even interior restaurant dining onto the public realm? And so that really matters for business owners as they are trying to boost their revenue back up to the rates that they were pre-COVID to meet all of their financial obligations. Thinking about providing storage for extra furniture. So, you walk into a restaurant, you won't say, man, every time I walk into a restaurant now, it's empty. And yes, it's going to be a big adjustment, but humans are one of the most adaptable species. And then coordinating trash pickup. So yes, we have our clean and safe teams in some districts. However, if there's an ability to do trash pickup safely, given that additional opportunities for infection may exist, and then doing it more routinely as another added bonus in order to really remove potential virus from the actual corridor, and then provide that opportunity, relieve the property owner, the business owner from that responsibility.
Bobby, you just mentioned someone who is doing guerrilla urbanism in this regard, and I know Beth Warrick in particular, as many of the audience. Could you say that clearly one more time for those that want to search out their work?
Yeah, so it's Yard and Company, so like the backyard. Yard and Company, they're based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And they have done some of these spray painting projects within Over the Rhine so far in some of the neighborhood districts.
Terrific, thanks so much.
Welcome.
So moving forward now, we're going to talk about the importance of retail inventory. So Matthew, you can go forward. Thank you. So a lot of you have business improvement districts, that's really how you're operating. And so you have this document, this building and business inventory. Some of you that are just getting started, it's a great time while we are, we're all very, very busy, but while we are not out and about in the district, put this together. People in the real estate industry can help you put this together. All of this information is in the tax office at your local county. But basically having a list, an Excel spreadsheet that is searchable and editable of every piece of property in your district and what year it was built, what the address is, the property owner that owns it. And then, we would recommend that during this time, start really editing that document to be a living, breathing document to reflect the situation that we're in right now. So adding a column for the tenant that's currently occupying that building and contact information for that person. If you know lease price and terms, sometimes just by having conversations, you can learn that. Really great to keep up with that. Also color coding that Excel document for at-risk businesses. Bobby's been talking a little bit about at-risk businesses, and certainly, we know that following those industry trends, that certain restaurants, apparel, just those that might not have the capital to hang on, or that maybe the owner is older and just doesn't want to do this anymore. Having kind of a code for that, so that you can be aware if somebody walks into your office and says, hey, I'm thinking about opening up a business or investing in a piece of property, that you can know where to direct them. Additionally, having a code for vacant property, of course, and then documenting who requested or received local assistance. Of course, many folks have received assistance or certainly requested it through the CARES Act, but locally, if there is available funding, keeping track of that. Again, that lets you know who needs the assistance the most, who has received it, and who might be at risk. You can really be a terrific conduit between brokers and property owners and potential businesses. You're the one that knows everything that's happening in your district. And so this is a recommendation that we certainly would make.
In that regard, Jennifer, any strategies for getting information? Often lease terms are confidential.
They are. So the most luck that I have ever had with that is talking to the tenant, talking to the business owner, not outright saying, "Hey, what are you paying rent?" But how are things going? You know, have you had to request rent relief? If so, have you received that? You know, and a lot of times they'll say, "Yeah, you know, I'm paying $3,000 a month. I can't keep doing that." So just those anecdotal conversations. It's certainly very difficult for you to populate your entire inventory with that information, but also as a property turns over, contacting the property owner and saying, "Hey, what are you leasing this building for? I'd like to help you point people in the right direction. What are the terms?" And just kind of fill that in.
Thanks so much. That came from the audience. That was Andrea, I believe.
Great question.
So I'm kind of sad because Jen stole the thunder for this slide.
I'm sorry, Bobby.
So not gonna go into the details of each of these, but you know, as we consider, you know, what does that mean for?
I promised not to do that, didn't I, earlier? I am so
I'm the one that did it, so my apologies.
No worries. So as you know, as we're combining our information, of course, things become a little bit duplicative. I think that means you have a sound strategy. As you know, as you consider these relationships, specifically, you know, how market rates and lease terms are changing is one of the additional anecdotes I wanted to discuss, because you know, as you see with the reopening protocol, there's limited occupancy standards that will be deployed, specifically for, you know, restaurants that, you know, may had 150 seats, might be down to 20 to 50%, what I'm seeing across the nation. So being prepared for that, and how does that impact the actual asking rental rates? And so understanding that you might have to work with your property owners to understand where they are now, where they can be.
But maybe to expand on that a little bit more. So I know that in the prior webinars, there's been a lot of questions about what's the viability at, you know, 25%, 50% occupancy. And now you're alluding to, is that part of the conversation you should be having with your landlord as well? Any overarching or general thoughts that you have in that regard, Bobby?
So that, you know, if we want our districts to remain a vibrant place, and you know, restaurants definitely add to that vibrancy, there will need to be some potential trade-offs that occur financially in order to make that happen. And so what that looks like property by property may vary, and because, you know, whatever the landlord's interest is, whatever their debt obligations are, etc. However, as we think about, you know, the market right sizing itself, you know, you will probably see, you know, many of these restaurants not be able to withstand, especially if they can't come to agreement with their landlord, or, you know, just financially speaking. But over time, that there could be an opportunity for that same space to be backfilled by another restaurant. So, you know, there are small businesses that, you know, plan to launch for years and have their business plan together, have received their financing, although hopefully the the lenders will still deploy it. That's to be determined. But thinking about, you know, them, which I'll talk to a little bit in the following slides.
Okay, terrific. Thanks so much.
Great. And speaking of restaurants, you know, following those trends, these are the national brands that our company works with, that are among many others, but that we are hearing are expanding. So I think when I, you know, made a couple of comments about don't lose too much hope that there are businesses that are expanding, this is a tough time, and certainly we don't want to underscore that. But for certain businesses, it's providing a boost that they needed, or it sort of falls in line with their existing business model. So I just received a restaurant report this morning that showed that a lot of these fast casual restaurants, Chipotle is one, Panera Bread is another, Shake Shack is one, they are changing their business model, not temporarily, but permanently, to start having drive-throughs in every single one of their new businesses. They're even branding, I think Chipotle's is their new concept is called Chipotle Lane, like a pickup lane. So, you know, they're investing marketing into this new shift. So I think that's important to note that a lot of this is not going to be temporary. A lot of these shifts in homing, pickup are really going to become permanent. So what can your district do? Bobby gave a lot of really great suggestions about the public realm, and you know, and how can that space be repurposed and rededicated to pickup lines and things of that nature. But also Crunch Fitness. I don't know if you guys have heard of that company. They're relatively new. But it goes to really support the fact that that's a business that's well capitalized. They are new since the recession. They're not carrying that debt. They've got money, and they know that a lot of people are working out in their homes and they don't like it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of my Peloton. I'm ready to get back into the gym. And so there's a model for that. And so this business has said, we're opening 20 stores. We're still opening 20 stores in 2021. And Harbor Freight is another, you know, obviously we've seen, I don't know if you guys have been by your local home improvement store. It's a little scary, just how many people are there. But as we're home, people are doing home improvement projects. So a lot of this probably sounds like common sense, but I think it is. We need to apply what we know from the news and from our own behaviors about how this has affected our lifestyles and translate that into how businesses are going to have to move forward.
And so back to moving forward about those businesses with their business plan just ready to go. So strategies to really understand, you know, what the potential for backfilling is with those businesses. Really engaging the organizations that provide, you know, technical assistance to these businesses. So that could include your local SBDC or any other entrepreneurial ecosystem support organization. So, you know, that varies across the nation of who's actually there. Think about, you know, some of your events that you have. Are there vendors that have done successfully? And, you know, specifically thinking about, all right, hey, this pickle guy have had a line around the store, you know, around the block, day in and day out. Is there an opportunity for him to actually open up a small brick and mortar space? You know, that could look like subdividing a larger building or co-locating internally with the restaurant, so who may actually use the pickles within some of their recipes. So thinking creatively about, you know, how do you activate the corridor again, given, you know, potential vacancy. And then finally, thinking about how your municipality leverages CDBG changes. So, you know, there's $10 billion, $10 million allocated for CDBG funding, and that is to be spread out across the nation. And if you think about, if you look at HUD's policy, they have a 2-pager that's on it. They have 2 points that specifically applies to retail. So that's avoid job loss created by business closures related to social distancing by providing short-term working capital assistance to small businesses to enable retention of jobs held by low and moderate income persons. And then 2, provide technical assistance, grants, and other financial assistance to establish, stabilize, and expand micro enterprises that provide medical, the key one, food delivery, building on Jen's previous point, cleaning and other services to support home health and quarantine. So thinking about, you know, how evolving these business practices, specifically for your smaller businesses that don't have the corporate teams of Jersey Mike's and Chipotle to deploy some of those same standards.
Absolutely. And I think Bobby makes an excellent point about looking at your markets. I've seen that in districts that I've worked in where really farmers market serves as an incubator for future businesses. And we are seeing a lot that farmers markets are opening back up, even when retail stores are not opening up, you know, markets being in an outdoor setting, keeping distance, but really connecting those farmers with consumers. So I'd like to echo that. I think that's a terrific suggestion. And as you're looking to backfill vacancies, I think it's so important to really do exactly what Bobby just said, and that is be creative. You know, relationships are going to be key moving forward, and knowing your property owners, getting to know them, I think is going to be critical. And so many of you have probably considered this, but short-term leases, I think, are an excellent first step. There are those entrepreneurs that are out there and that are looking for opportunities. There's going to be a lack of confidence because of the economic situation to just open up that store that they've been dreaming about. And so providing opportunities for them to pop up in a vacant building for maybe 1 month or 3 months, have a summer series of you know, pop-up businesses, but not in outdoor settings, but in those existing buildings that are vacant. So really bringing people back, reintroducing people to your downtown with new and vibrant businesses. And lastly, you know, subdividing, talking to your property owners about subdividing their ground floor storefronts. You know, so often we talk to entrepreneurs that say, you know, I'm ready to open a business, but I don't need 3,000 square feet. Or we talk to a business that is struggling in a downtown district, and when we walk in, we see, well, no, yeah, you don't need this much space. You need less inventory. You need a smaller footprint. So we've seen a lot of success with property owners, you know, cutting up that storefront into 3 spaces, maybe with a shared bathroom in the back or something like that. So thinking creatively, but really I see all of your roles as being those downtown, you know, directors and innovators is really to be the conduit. What we have seen working with retailers and working with property owners and landlords is that they have tunnel vision. Of course, that's their livelihood. They are locked in on what the state's going to do, when they can open up, what are the rules, how can they get money. They're not thinking about necessarily the future. And so I think that's an excellent role for all of us to play, is to really help them imagine what their space could look like in the future and help them connect those dots.
Jen, that was a perfect segue to steps to safely reacquaint shoppers. So, you know, as we think about, you know, how do we do this? You know, getting our businesses back to business. You know, there are various resources available out on the market right now, but you know, what I've heard to be really impactful for business owners is clear and consistent messaging. So saying, hey, these are the protocols that are established for our district. You mimicking whether that's the public health authority or the state or the local county, specifically if they align with the best practices that are that will allow business owners to do these things safely. You know, as Jen talked about previously, really thinking back to how does, you know, safety and a well-trained staff, et cetera, really instill customer loyalty over time. So avoiding, you know, a PR nightmare that if some of an infection occurs right within your one of the district stores, in order to say, hey, let's actually preface that with great signage, with, you know, some outreach that occurs on a weekly basis, and with, you know, new public health information. My firm has released a Back to Brick and Mortar guide, which is, you know, step by step for business owners to look at in terms of everything from operating protocol to some of the communications that happen between the business and the customer. So as we think, you know, holistically about, you know, getting our businesses back to businesses and reopening, we must ensure that we have their back, that we can, you know, continue to be a voice of reason when there's so many voices and noise within this pandemic. However, think about, you know, what it looks like optimistically for both the business owners, the property owners, and your district. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for all of your information presentation. Real quick, Bobby, the link for the HUD program has popped up quite a few times. You may have that available that you can share with the group.
Yes, I can send, I can put it in the chat, and can you copy it to the answers?
Yeah, well, that'll be terrific.
Okay.
We've got just over 5 minutes left in our program, and I'd love to get a question from the audience. John Archer, I don't know if you're available still and able to unmute your microphone, but your question regarding drive-through and kind of physical space is really interesting. Are you available, John?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, and remind everyone where you're from, please.
Toronto, Canada. Yeah, so it's great. Thanks very much for everything so far. Really, really interesting. But yeah, you mentioned drive-throughs as a potential kind of more opportunity. A lot of municipalities we work with, especially here in Canada, heavy regulations against drive-throughs and things like that. But with the curbside pickups and all these kinds of things, are you suggesting we should revisit some of the drive-through rules and regulations, or kind of what other opportunities, especially for more dense downtowns and districts?
So one thing, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Bobby, please.
Yeah, just one thing I've seen is it's been considered, is the removal of on-street parking, at least temporarily, in order to facilitate some type of drive-through opportunity for the businesses that line more dense inline commercial districts. And then I'll turn it over to Jen in order to talk about where drive-through is headed on a more global scale.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. And thank you for the great question. Yes, we definitely recommend that that be revisited from a policy standpoint. And especially as we're learning that these national brands are moving towards that model. When we think about retail, the local aspect really always does follow the national leaders. And so when we think about, omni-channel retail strategies and really the buy online, pick up in store, a lot of these national brands have been doing that for quite a while, and the locals just kind of started to implement that. So following their lead is always really successful typically. And so us learning that they are implementing that really tells us that they believe, which makes me believe that is here to stay. What Bobby said about the public space and the on-street parking is terrific. We've even seen some main streets in more dense areas shut down traffic on their main thoroughfares and put up bollards, shut it down to vehicular traffic just so that people can walk and go pick up what they need. But then also those delivery type services like DoorDash and Postmates, we're seeing them. I don't know if you've Waiter, if you've looked at the stock market, but they are experiencing huge surges in sales volumes. And so we think those platforms are definitely ones that downtowns can really invest in, not financially, but in relationships and try to, if they're not currently serving your restaurants downtown, to get them there. But it's certainly here to stay. And from a policy standpoint, we definitely recommend sharing those trends with your policymakers and seeing what can be done to really open up the public space for that type of delivery or that type of pickup.
And that leads me to, we're going to hopefully open the microphone for Joan Redine. But when we talk about drive-through, it struck me as pre-COVID-19, actually years ago, the question was food trucks. Well, how are we going to manage food trucks? We have these new, concepts that come in, and drive-through into an urban area might be considered kind of a new concept. So I would agree that, there may be some changing of the rules, but let's again remember we were already concerned about curb management. And I think, taking away a lane of parking and replacing it with something else is something that's being discussed greatly, whether it's for drive-through or whether it's just for more pedestrian space, which leads me to Joan. Joan, is your microphone open and are you with us still? So Joan, I don't think we're going to have her, but she was alluding to.
I think I'm here.
Oh, great. Joan, remind everyone where you're from.
I need to check and make sure I'm here. I'm from Great Falls, Montana.
Welcome aboard. Please go ahead with your question.
Well, so I don't think I really had a question, but I commented on outdoor dining, and we here in Great Falls were the second city in the nation to create what's been dubbed a pedlet, and we've copied West Dallas, Wisconsin. I always feel the need to give them credit, but it is an opportunity that's ADA compliant, that allows for outdoor dining. And it has been so well received in our city. We spoke last year at the National Main Street Conference on this topic and concept of outdoor dining. And we had initially one Padlet in place in Great Falls. And then the following 2017, so then 2018 we had 2, in 2019 we had 4, and now I know of at least 2, possibly 3 more restaurants in downtown Great Falls that are inquiring about getting a Padlet this summer. It's a means of creating more dining space for the restaurants, and it's ADA compliant and safer for the diner. It's just a fantastic program we've created. So that was it. It wasn't really a question, it was more of a comment. Sorry.
No, quite all right. And that's part of these discussions. And so when I saw the idea of the Padlet, or if it's a parklet because you're utilizing some of the on-street parking, I think the question I would form from that is, maybe Bobby and or Jennifer, what are you hearing from your local partners about expanding public space and managing public space, whether it's through a Padlet or how we're managing the queues? I will tell you, this is one of the primary questions we get from across North America is we need more space, but then we also have to manage physical distancing. What do you think are going to be some of those key solutions that we really have to focus on first?
Yeah, one of the things I saw, I think it was actually in Birmingham, Alabama, they have transferred their farmers market to a drive-through farmers market like protocol. So they, have the same vendors all just lined up. And so as people, get in line and they drive through the entire market, and that enables, some of the sales to still occur. I was talking with, a few bids here in Washington, D.C., and they were, discussing with the planning department about what's the opportunity to close down, some of the streets, whether that's, for a 4-hour period, say on Saturday, for outdoor dining Saturday, especially during some of the summer, warm summer months. And really, to drive that revenue as well as create an event and practice some of the same social distancing protocols. So I think it's going to, one, require great coordination with your planning departments. So understanding, what or the public works, if they manage the right of way, in order to see what is possible. And then 2, it will require a great bit of creativity. So understanding that, some of the services that were previously provided within the district, may not be feasible at this time. So whether that's, splash park, splash pad day at the park, etc. But, what are we doing with that space as it's not used for, what its initial use was.
Anything you would add, Jennifer?
Yeah, well, Joan, congratulations on a successful implementation of that program. And you're right on. In fact, I think it really goes back to also the point we discussed earlier about that part of the coming back is going to be managing the psychological effect of this on consumers, right? That even if it's legal, like in my home state, I mentioned that the restaurants are opening up at 50%, we're still staying home. And so how can you really encourage and instill that confidence back into the consumers to revisit your businesses? And what we're finding is that people feel much more comfortable entering into the public realm in outdoor spaces. And so I think you're right on with what you're doing. I think, like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing people, shut down the main street for outdoor dining and for pickup and things of that nature. So even that, as we mentioned, these national brands are making more permanent changes. I think main streets and downtown districts are at a really unique place in that they can work with their policymakers to make shifts in policy that will allow this type, but removing on-street parking does not have to be permanent. That can become a temporary pickup lane for the next couple months until that consumer confidence really builds up. Shutting down the traffic with bollards for outdoor dining, if you don't have a system like Joan has, you know, just temporarily, again, get that consumer confidence back up as you reintroduce people to the market. So think temporarily, but I think long-term in terms of, you know, people are going to shift their purchasing habits permanently, but what can you do temporarily and permanently to respond to that?
You know, I want to thank you both because I know we have an abundant number of questions that some are very technical, some are very pointed with regard to design and et cetera. If you'd be so kind, we'd love to send those questions on to you to provide some additional input after this program. For all of our attendees, you've been staring at the slide talking about taking the webinar survey and your opportunity for AICP continuing education credits. Look for that to come immediately following. And I would just say overall, you know, we're starting this conversation about reopening, you know, design in the inside of the spaces and managing the external spaces and even understanding the economic trends that are going to begin to unfold is something IDA will continue to showcase in all of our webinar programs moving forward. But I stand confident that there's no better industry than the place management organizations who are actually going to broker that conversation between the municipality and the business owner, and rules are going to have to be modified or relaxed or temporarily unrestricted. I think we're going to have such a dynamic year ahead of us that, you know, what was not allowed previously. One of my favorite comments came out of Canada just past Wednesday when we were talking about how quickly government is moving. And so someone reminded us that, you know, not too long ago, cannabis was completely illegal in Canada, and very quickly it fell under essential services in post-COVID-19. So, you know, governments and rules and industries are all changing quite quickly. I think this is the perfect industry to broker those conversations, and I know it's the industry that comes up with innovative solutions. So to both you, Jennifer and Bobby, thank you so much for preparing and presenting so much great work, joining us for this little over an hour presentation, and all of your support to all of the member organizations of IDA. We thank you both. And to all of our attendees, thank you for joining us. Still have over 250 attendees that are locked in and looking for information. So that tells me that we need to continue to do these programs, especially on reopening and certainly retail. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend and stay healthy, please.
Thanks, David.